This is Nigel Gordon-Johnson, and welcome to the first of the Body Language Masterclass Series. Body language is one of the most underrated and overlooked aspects of the job interview process. We spend hours, if not days of our time, preparing and formulating our resume or CV, researching the company that we're interviewing at, and getting ready to answer as many different interview questions that we can think of. But we spend little or no time working out what people are really thinking. However, the fact is that we are giving away indications through our body, both large and small, that give away what we are really thinking. Imagine the power that you could have if you knew exactly what the interviewer thought about you from the moment you walked into that interview. Imagine if you knew for certain whether they liked what they heard from you, what you were saying to them. Imagine if you knew whether you would be getting another interview, or even better, a job offer. That is what understanding body language can do for you. Today, we will be in discussion with one of the world's top body language experts. Carole Railton has spent decades studying, training, and mastering the art of body language, and she shares with me some of her key tips and advice that will help you when you go for your interview, whether it's an online video interview or face-to-face. Feel free to take notes as you go along, but there will be a free downloadable guide that will be made available. Just press the link below. Please do press the like button if you enjoyed this video, and also click to subscribe for more valuable content to help you with your career and job search journey. Carole Railton, for those who perhaps don't know, is one of the top business body language specialists in the world. She is going to make a really fascinating and interesting contribution as we go through as part of this body language masterclass series, where we're interviewing some of the top body language experts, specifically in the line of business, as we've talked about before. But is that really where you got started? I mean, I guess it'd be fascinating how people get into body language in the first place. I mean, what prompted you?
I'd worked for big companies like IBM, and I was working for Xerox in the Middle East. And at times I had to use interpreters. And so what you're doing with that is waiting for them to respond to you in English, but simultaneously you're watching the body language. And there was an occasion where I didn't believe what the guy was telling me from both his body language and what was going on around the boardroom. So I just started studying it. I was flying around quite a lot, so I had quite a lot of time. But I do remember, and obviously you can take this out if you want, I remember phoning my director in the States when I was working for Xerox, managing 9 countries in the Middle East, and saying, you need to put me on a body language course. And he said, have you lost your mind, Carole? I just want you to get the sales and keep the team steady. So people didn't really respect body language at that time. Yeah. I think it's become more prevalent, especially as we go on screen, where things happen more quickly. In the old days, if you like, before we went virtual, we were still physical, we'd make our mind up about someone in the first 30 seconds. Now it's probably 3. So everybody has made their mind up about you and I already, and their next thought will validate that first thought. So it's
they're probably all left by now. So
yeah, well, let's have a good conversation between us then.
But it's, you know what, it's absolutely true, and I've noticed that from when I started out in business, I think that the body language side of it was probably seen as a sort of slightly sort of dark art, bit quackery. Is it, how much do we believe this? A little bit more of a performance type of thing, rather than a something that's to be believed. And to where we are now, so I think that sort of echoes in what it is. But I'm particularly fascinated by that element that you just got that instinctively. You knew you weren't being told the truth.
Yes.
And I think a lot of, and obviously we talk a lot about how people are looking for jobs in particular and developing their careers, and when they're interviewing, that they will often have that instinct for them of whether they think I'm doing well or not doing well. Now, more often than not, sometimes that can be you see that? I mean, what are those areas that you think that instinctively that you sort of know? Where are those sort of initial signs that you can look at?
Well, I think now, if you're in a situation where you're wearing a mask and you can't, it's not a transparent mask, then there's much more focus on the eyes. And one of the things that many of us were taught years ago was that when we were selling or trying to influence, we'd look someone in both their eyes and we'd use this triangle space. For me, that doesn't work. That's a threatening pose if you stare at someone for any length of time into both eyes. So what we need to do is to break things up. And the left side of our body is the receiving side, and the right side is the giving side. So we give out with our right hand, don't we? When we're able to, we shake with the right hand, and we receive on the left. So if you want to influence someone, rather than staring at them into both eyes, I suggest you look at their left eye. And if you do this with a breath pattern that's similar to the person you're talking to as well, and that's a little bit harder to actually do, you need to practice that. But if you can do that, then you have more influence, and eventually that person will look you in the left eye, and then you communicate much more quickly. So what the eye, we have so, pardon? I'm losing.
No, sorry, no, carry on, Carole. Yeah, carry on.
So the eyes have always been vital. We have many sayings about eyes, green eyes, jealous eyes, eyes of the soul. And now it's much more prevalent, because the eyes are probably the first thing we see of someone when we're in the corridor, because we're wearing masks. And then when we're on screen, we're looking at the face generally, not the whole body. So we're focused on the face. And because we've got used to looking at the eyes by wearing masks, seeing people in masks, we probably go straight to the eyes. So I think it's really important you look in their left eye so you don't threaten them, and so you influence them more easily. And you know you've won, if you like, if they start looking at you in the left eye and the conversation speeds up.
I mean, that's absolutely fair. I've never heard that before, and it's really interesting. And especially as you rightly say, in this day and age, you know, especially for interviews, you know, we're not really meeting face to face. Now, for some,
No.
they are, but as we go into more and more series of lockdowns around the world, and these things, unfortunately, are going to be with us for a few months yet. Perhaps if we're lucky, a few months yet. It's all on video. And so what we're essentially doing here now is exactly what people are having to do for interviews. So they're looking at tiny little elements of it. But I suspect that what's ending up happening is that, certainly from the candidate point of view, they're probably, I don't have time to look at micro nuances of what somebody's doing. And the interviewer is just going to look at if there's an extraordinary event that takes place, suddenly then that will trigger something, whether it's moving forward or moving back. But other than that, it's going to be difficult for them to sort of read instinctively.
Indeed, because they can't see the whole body. And I do work for a stockbroker, and I look at the CEOs of massive companies, and I'm looking to see how committed they are to what they're saying. I obviously can't say they're lying. That would get me into trouble. But I'm looking at where the weaknesses are when they present to the press and stockbrokers, because stockbrokers are going to advise their clients to go down certain routes and invest in certain companies. But if I can see a deviance on a certain point that they're offering about what they're doing in the future, then I can suggest that that program is not fully engaged, or they haven't allocated the funds to it yet, something like that. Then the stockbrokers will not advise investment in that company. And the particular stockbroker that I'm working for actually now advises its CEOs that they're being analysed. which I think is quite interesting. And I've changed my vocabulary slightly in the reports that I do as a result. So those micro signals, you're right, are not easily identifiable. The larger signals are, and they're looking for a deviance from what the person is normally showing, because a lot of the signals, the old-fashioned signals, you cross your arms there, you're deflecting. That isn't necessarily true. A lot of creatives cross their arms, and what they're doing is they're on the stomach. They're digesting their ideas and deciding whether that's good or whether there's another option. So the old-fashioned terms that we all sort of knew, I think, are changing, and that's what I write about. I write about how to behave using a mask and that sort of thing, rather than the old-fashioned ones that we all know. Oh, he scratched his nose, he must be lying.
That's the one I think that we hear the most of, and I've heard the most of whenever I've done sort of debriefs of jobs, interviews that taken place. That hiring manager will come back and I've honestly, I couldn't even count on how many times I've been told, oh, they were looking away like that, they were scratching their nose. I just didn't trust what they were saying was true.
Yes. Well, it is still a signal that they might be lying, but you have to look much more broadly. Is this person nervous, and are they scratching the chin and the arm? Okay. Then it's negated. It's something they're doing in that moment. Yeah. And actually, just going back to the stockbrokers and the CEOs, I need to look at a video of them behaving normally before I assess them. Yeah. Okay, because I need to know what the normal behavior is to notice what the deviance is. Yeah. So that's important to understand as well. Not everybody's the same. We didn't all die of the plague, and even though there's a few of us dying, COVID, we're not all going to die. We all have different behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's fascinating because talking about that, because it's just, hey, it's interesting, and I guess you can relate a lot of things. Obviously here in the UK we had the announcement on Saturday, and you had the Prime Minister and the two scientific officers there. I instinctively, because I'm taking part in these interviews with body language experts, and I'm constantly got body language on the mind at the moment. I was spending my time looking for signs and doing that and seeing whether, so I was deliberately doing it. I guess you probably do that all the time for everything, but it's fascinating to do that. And I wonder, would you agree with me that I think that's quite a good way for people who are looking to try and get themselves more attuned to that, to actually almost as part of their practice before an interview, is to start observing people on the TV and start looking for signs, seeing whether there's areas there where they could do that.
Indeed, I think looking at people on the television is quite a good way to go. And something I'd ask people to focus on if they're going for interviews and things like this, whilst watching people on the TV, in the discussion programs and news programs, they show the feet of the people. So you have an advantage over us now looking probably from waist level up. And the feet are really, really important. If we have both feet on the ground, we're literally grounded. So I think for anybody who wants to influence or do well in an interview, they need to have both feet on the ground. And you can notice how this doesn't work with people on the television, because if you see them, you can't see my feet, but I instinctively then scrunch them around my chair. If they put their feet around the chair legs and take their feet off the ground, off the floor, they are more likely to lose that debate. And obviously it's not 100%, but if you watch a few, you're going to find about 92% will lose the debate. So their feet off the ground. And if they're entwined around a chair as well, that's just going to take them down even further. So you watch the politicians recently. I mean, you know, I can't do it anymore without laughing because I know what's going on. But if you look at the politicians, where their feet are, how they are, you'll see them being blown away by the interviewers. It's really interesting. And then you've got the generally men who sit back, legs apart, you know, appearing very relaxed, but they're not in control. They think they know their subject, and they start off very well. And then as it goes through, you lose, as the audience, you lose the authenticity of that person. They lose it, and you begin to doubt them. So there's many of those traditional things that need to be done, in my opinion. And one is to have your feet, both of them, on the ground. And it's a disadvantage for women who wear very high-heeled shoes, because they're pushing their feet forward and they're moving their body. Their body, I'm exaggerating again, their body is moving as a result into not such a strong position. So in a situation like this, ladies, kick off your shoes, put your feet on the floor, basically. That's what I would recommend.
And so, and is that so? By the sounds of it, sort of works both ways, both from the body language that how you instinctively feel by how you are presenting yourself, and also as well as how the other person will interpret you.
Absolutely, because there are always those two sides, aren't there? You know, how you are in your body, literally. We talk about people being in their body. So you need to be grounded, you need to be strong if you're in an interview situation, which I think is what you're talking about in the main. And similarly, you need to understand that the person you're talking to is strong and confident and is with a company that you want to work with. So if they're not displaying these signals to you, there are some questions you need to ask. One of them is, why isn't Carole Relton in your company? But I mean, they're very, very basic things, and you can see them, as you suggest, by watching the television.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and in particular that element, because I think that is overlooked, where people don't realize that quite how they are positioning themselves and what they're doing affects them and how they're going to portray themselves as they go along.
Yes.
I mean, some of the advice I always give to candidates, and as I go through my coaching with them, is about, before you actually start the interview, to get there early, get into the room and work out what your position is in there. What, you know, all the sort of basics, like in the summer, if you've got the sun coming through the window right into your eyes or something, like, don't suffer in silence, do something about it beforehand. You know, if organize the room in a different way, you know, get to where you feel comfortable in it. If the desk's the wrong way round, you know, move it, you know, move the chair, you know, do all of those kind of things before someone comes in. And it's interesting that really, as part of that, should also be, you know, thinking about your positioning of how you are presenting yourself. And what you need to do as well.
And the feet will do that, because if you're all cross-legged and everything, you know, your body is more enclosed because you're coming in, whereas if you have both feet on the ground, you're more open. Which is what you need to be, because the interviewer wants to get information from you and you want to give it. You don't want to hold on what's totally you. You only do that when you're in a really dangerous position. You know, we cower down, don't we, and become a small ball. So that's not where you are when you're being interviewed. You want to be quite open.
And sometimes you can also, I mean, you could have that sort of nightmare scenario, can't you, of having an interviewer who can be very alpha, can be very dominant, and do all those sort of displays of doing that. And you know, whether it's because they feel important themselves, they want to intimidate you, you know, there's lots of different reasons as to why they do that. But is there a way that the candidate themselves, the person being interviewed, can actually influence the behavior? If they're coming across somebody who's really quite forceful like that, I mean, have you got any advice how they do that? I mean, I guess the sort of, forgive me before you answer, some of the people I can think of outside of the job interview market space is when you have people like a Piers Morgan, for instance, who is a very dominant character, very forceful. And if you sort of can think of how he sits, he's always very high up. He sort of perches on his chair, and it's almost like he's leaping out
forward
the
as
screen.
well.
Very
Yes.
forward, yeah, very forward, very dominant like that. And it's interesting to see how people cope with him, because when he's on the charge, most of these, and it's usually the politicians he's having a go at, but they just don't know how to handle it. They've tried different techniques, but I've not really seen many people deal with him well. But what would you think? What would you suggest? Are there tactics you could do?
Well, I think, yes, of course there are. Definitely have your feet on the ground, and they must be firmly on the ground. You know, if you're just gentle with them, with someone like Piers, it's not going to work. So your feet really need to be on the ground. And the first thing to do, this is tough, this bit I'm going to say, and this is really needs teaching. You can't just say it in a couple of words. But the left eye is really powerful, because someone like Piers will be looking at you through both eyes, which is a threatening pose, as I said before. So if you switch immediately away from the trying to do the same as him, which everybody says you must always replicate what they're doing, we'll talk about that in a minute, I hope, is to look in their left eye. And by looking in their left eye, as I said before, if you can get their breath pattern, which is the key to this, is getting the breath pattern, then you're in sync with that person, because the communication's flowing from left to left, giving. You're in their bubble, in old-fashioned terms of the bubble, and you're breathing together, and breath is vital. I mean, this is what got my head above the pulpit quite early on. I talked about breath as being a body language signal.
Yeah.
And without breath, we're dead. So it's vital, you know, in all situations. And our breath changes in different situations, doesn't it? You know, if we're really excited, we talk quickly and we've got less breath, and we're talking at the top of our lungs. And if we're really chilled, lying on the beach in Barbados, we talk more slowly. So, you know, there are ways of gleaning information just by listening to someone's breath. In fact, we do it all the time. If we're on a train or a plane and someone sighs, what do we know? We know that they're tired, fed up, it's not their best day. So we're actually, as we were talking about right at the beginning, taking these signals on intuitively. We just don't analyze them all the time. So yes, I would suggest you keep your both feet firmly on the ground. So your legs would be slightly apart, not together, slightly apart, hip width apart with your feet on the floor. Look into their left eye and try and mimic their breath pattern. It's not about mimicking their signals, it's about their breath, because that's the essence of someone's life. It's really important, and I think I'd love to be interviewed by Piers. See if I could. So if you can arrange that,
I'll see what I can do. I don't think he'd be quite so mean to you. I think and the interesting thing is, I think if you had somebody there where he knew that you had an expertise in body, I think it would automatically put him in a defensive position. Okay. I think he would, and that's the interesting bit. He relies, in my view, from my experience of looking at people from interviews, is that I think he relies on the fact that he knows that when he's charging away at politicians, that they will naturally not want to give him all the information. They're quite careful with their language. They're quite diplomatic in how they approach it. They're constantly thinking about, is this a vote winner? I don't want to make a gaffe. I don't want to do that. So he knows that he can push them and prod them and have all of that, and they won't start giving him the full information, and it makes them look deceptive, and then he'll just go after it. So he knows he's in a dominant position. He's in charge before he's even started.
Yeah, well, he's had years of experience.
That's going to be a bit more tricky.
I know. He was the editor of The Sun, which I think you probably know, and I knew him then because I was involved with a lawyer at The Sun. So they all used to turn up at the parties and things, and they used to have lots of parties at The Sun. And
in that case, you've got a lot on him in that case.
Yes, I'm ahead. And he's not a loud person when he's in the parties. He's actually quite low key.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like to talk to anyone he doesn't know. He's an interesting one, actually,
Yeah.
and easy to crack because there's quite a lot of vulnerability in there.
Which of course we all do. You know,
Yeah.
we're all human, and we forget that. And I notice that a lot, and especially with candidates going for roles where they desperately want the job. If they look at it and think, actually, you know, for either because they financially need it, or more often than not, where they think this is my dream job. I know I can do it. I'm really good at this. And they apply so much pressure to themselves. And the fact that they want to try and impress who they're going to see, they will go into that interview, putting that interviewer on a pedestal already.
Yes.
And then and so already you have that inequality going in there when you do that. And you know, again, you know, one of the strongest ways of interviewing is making sure you go there and you're seen as peers. You know, you shouldn't be one over another. It shouldn't really be like that. And it's how they then get there. I think a lot of it should be preparation up front, but more often than not, unfortunately, we get ourselves into positions during an interview whereby you suddenly think, oh Christ, you know, either I've messed up the first 3 seconds and something's gone, I've instinctively picked up that they don't like me, or you know, they're not sure about me, and then you start panicking. And it then goes into that part of the human psyche where, you know, it's said, isn't it, that you can work on your brain and around about between 6 to 10 things at any one time, where you can just continually do that when you're in a calm situation. But when you go into a high stress situation, it ends up being about one, maybe two maximum, but it basically goes down to one. And the one thing they're thinking of is, how do I make a good impression? How do I do this? And then you're asked a question, and of course, suddenly all the preparation work you've done goes out the window. You can't remember it because you're at stress. And again, some of those techniques I push on people is how you try and slow your breathing down and try and get de-stress in that stressful situation, so that you can start getting your brain working again and getting more information in there. But easier said than done. And you talked a little bit about that mirror when you mentioned the mirroring side of it.
Yes.
And I grew up in my sales career with NLP and training on that side, and using mirroring techniques. But again, is that something that you can use as an emergency, sort of like hit this, break glass in emergency? Can I use mirroring in order to do that, or is perhaps that not a good technique to use in order to try and suddenly get yourself back in the game?
It's a good question. I think most interviewers will understand mirroring, and I think it can compound your embarrassment or your nerves if you start to do it, frankly. So I firmly believe that the breath is the key to it. You know, if you get into the same breath pattern as the person you're talking to, then there's the flow of energy, whether it's through the screen or face to face. And the other person doesn't know why, but they actually like you. And they might realize that you can't fulfill the job role, or that you won't be the best person. But they like you. And that's really important, because then they're going to use better words when they describe you to the person they can pass you on to, or something like that. It's going to be a much healthier situation. And whilst I think you're right, you must do all the preparation you can before you go on screen. Something like today, I've just walked on screen because it's been absolutely chaotic. It's a Monday morning and it's been so typical. Anyway, one of the things I think you can do, and maybe your listeners or viewers could try this now, and maybe you would try it and report back what happens. If you have both feet on the ground, which I write in all the books that I sign, I put, don't forget to put both feet on the ground. It's absolutely my bottom line. But if you imagine that you have a crown on your head right now, can you do that? So it's a very heavy jeweled crown, and you have to balance it. So just imagine that. If you were coming prepared to an interview, please, for the last minute, walk up to the screen wearing that crown. It's much it's more powerful and impactful if you do it whilst you're walking. We're just sitting, because I don't want to disturb the images and things, but if you just imagine that crown on your head, it's still on your head, it's really heavy, it's really jeweled, and walk up to the screen. Tell me what happened when you put the crown on your head, because I saw what you did. You tell me what you felt.
I immediately became more straight upwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah. So what that does is it opens up your chest, so your breathing is more relaxed. Whatever nerves you have, the breath is going to be better. Therefore, you are more relaxed, you're calm, that sort of thing. So you're going to display the better you. You can't fail with that. You can ring me whatever time of day or night it is. If you've used that and it doesn't work, you have to ring me, because it's just so perfect.
I can absolutely see that. I think if there's any takeaway I think that anyone takes from this conversation, is that, because I literally felt it. I think anybody watching this will probably have done the same thing.
Yes.
And instinctively done it, and you instinctively do. And you're right that what I also felt was I have suddenly increased my lung capacity. I do feel, not that I was particularly stressed, but I feel much more calm and at ease with it. But strangely, I also felt slightly more confident.
Of course you do.
You are.
When I work with actors, interestingly. You'd think that they would be the key to this. But I do work with some actors, and anyone that and what happens, they're very confident for several years, and then something happens and they get nerves. So it's just those small times that I'm working with them. But that is what I do with them. I make them wear this imaginary crown and then walk up the stairs onto the stage. Now, there's a few other things, obviously, I put in there too to enhance it, but they all do that one. It depends on who they are, what else we do. But we all do that one, and it's so powerful. And you talked earlier about the equality of an interview, that you must feel the same. You didn't mention it, but most people do, and that is that they now feel equal. I mean, crown, queen, superior. I'm not asking you to feel superior, not all the time anyway. I'm asking you to feel equal. And that will
absolutely
give it to you. That will give it to you. And if you think about our queen, you never see her rushing, do you? She's not going to be running down the corridor with a pen or a piece of paper or a disc or something. She's very regal indeed. And that's what we're asking for with that imaginary crown.
It works really well. And of course it works even better and more obviously when we come out of video interviewing and back to face-to-face, which I think inevitably we will do, perhaps less so than before, and it might take a while to fully go to that, but I suspect we will do. And that's a technique very much so that you can then be able to practice much more your whole body doing that.
In fact, if we just go back to something you were talking about, and you used peers as an example, if you are in a situation with an alpha male, in a physical, not a virtual, very often they'll have their hand on their office door or on their partition. That's an ownership signal. I own this, and go away, whoever you are. I'm too busy to talk to you. And if you see that, if on your travels you're walking along to get to there, immediately put your crown on, immediately, before you get to see that person, because they have in a small bullying tendencies, right? And so this overcomes that as well.
So I'm going in my own head. We can all think of people who you've worked with who have done exactly that.
Yes,
absolutely. And those are quite obvious, because you instinctively know they're demonstrating that I'm in charge. This is mine. I'm better than you. It doesn't take an expert to work that out, but I think what it does take is those techniques as to how do I subtly get more balance in that.
And there's quite a few techniques, obviously, that will help you.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. But yeah, it's interestingly more powerful for women than men, this one.
Yeah.
Because somehow women still feel slightly inferior no matter their position. It's interesting because women make more movement than men, and this is something that slows you down and makes you make your movements in a regal manner, not in a phonetic way. Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned that those sort of differences in the genders, and I think that's very true. And you also have that that sort of dilemma that women often have, where they want to be confident and need to be confident in there, but rightly or wrongly, they can often, if a woman is does it too much, whereas a man, it looks like, oh yes, you're a leader, and yes, it is all like that. The woman can sometimes be seen in a different way. You're domineering, so
Yes.
there's a real fine line to try and get that balance as to where that is, and it might be in a slightly different way to the way that men do. But I think that technique of the crown thing, I think, would work very well in that instance.
Yeah, it does. It's one of the things. I mean, men tend to walk along to a board meeting with a hand on the shoulder at the back of someone they know.
Mm-hmm.
Women don't do that. You won't see women walking. There are very many behaviours that are different, and I think men and women need to understand the differences as well as accommodating them and changing their own behaviours slightly so that the two can come together more easily. But they are different, and I think it's a nonsense to pretend they're the same. It's really silly. And as I said earlier, women make more movements than men, and yet when you're at the top, you make less moves. If we use the Queen again, CEOs of big companies, you don't see them rushing about. They act regally. So that's my focus, if you like, to help people in these situations to act more regally and be seen as equal automatically because they're acting in that way.
Yeah, it's very true. I think you're absolutely right that the higher up the food chain you go, the more deliberate and regal, as you put it. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, they're never really rushed. It doesn't often happen. I mean, sometimes with the sort of the fast-paced startups, and you might have the sort of the maverick type of person. But even if you look at those kind of individuals, like an Elon Musk, for instance, who is somebody who just does not stop working.
Yes.
He's very driven. But if you ever see interviews with him, he's incredibly deliberate in what he says, very thoughtful, takes his time to deliver something. But then he's probably, out of the people who work with him, will say he's one of the most driven people on the planet. But he's not somebody who's sprinting around the place doing it.
Yeah. I analysed the top 10 TED speakers' body language for an agency, and it actually went worldwide. It was a couple of years ago, and it was really interesting. They wanted me to find the common behaviours of these top 10 people, and in fact there were only 5 and only 3 that were really prevalent, which surprised me, actually. Really surprised me. But one of the things that stood out was all of these leaders, as we'll call them, 7 of them out of the top 10 used this signal, which is, I'm coming from the heart. All right, and there were men and women in there. There's the high guy in charge of Amazon. There were top 10 people, Anthony Robbins and things like that. And Robbins is completely different. He's alpha male, pulls people out of the audience, breaks all the rules, but he's effective. You cannot deny he's really effective. But he has his body size to do that. He's a big guy and he can do it. And that goes back to what I said earlier. Everyone is different. So these are general things I'm telling you. But if I'm working one-to-one, then there will be things that I can see that enhance that person and they need to develop those and show those more, especially in an interview situation where you might all be qualified at the same level. You have to be seen as different, you know, your personal branding, your style, that sort of thing. And that's more relevant every day in our business world, actually, that we have to stand out by being slightly different, a slightly skew, whatever it is. We have to be different to get known. And that's the bit I like, actually, the best, you know, is actually looking at an individual and seeing how we can help them progress by being that. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, you're right about Tony Robbins. You know, he's a extraordinary character and obviously very big in the way he is. And it sort of strikes me. You mentioned something earlier about Piers Morgan, about how he was privately to his sort of persona there, and sort of similar with Tony Robbins, how he is privately to how he is when he's speaking as well.
Yes.
So they're sort of two slightly different characters. I've seen the sort of the one-on-one Tony Robbins is still intense, but obviously he's not like all this like high energy. Again, you know, something that I think would be interesting to get your take on is almost what the character should be that the person plays when they're going in to an interview, because quite often what I mean by that is quite often when people go there, they suddenly think, I've got to be really professional, I've got to really do that, and I've got to do this. And sometimes they can be something completely different to who they are. Now, are you playing with fire a little bit if you're trying to almost act a part in order to get the job? Or do you think you should be, as the old adage go, just be yourself? So, you know, which do you think is going to be a better strategy for you going forward?
Okay. Okay. There's a couple of things that need to be answered before we can answer directly that question. One is, what we wear has a direct effect on how we behave. If you take a wedding dress or a morning suit, you know, for a guy, if I'm wearing a wedding dress, I'm going to walk completely differently as if I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Nobody would argue that. So what you're wearing in these situations is really, really important, and it needs to enhance who you are. You know, if you're a really colourful person, you wear colourful earrings or colourful ties or braces, something like that, and you then try and become a sober interviewee for your interview, then it's not going to work, because you are acting, you know, and it really won't help you. So you need to be as comfortable as you can whilst being smart. You know, if you're going to do an interview for an ad agency, then you're probably going to be wearing black jeans, chinos, and black t-shirt, something like that, which you wouldn't wear if you were going for a banking interview or something like that. So you must be mindful of how you dress, who you are, and the scenario you're going into. So it's how you fit yourself in with where you're going. Then your confidence is going to be raised by how much experience you have, how many good references you have, and how much people like you. But you're right, you have to be yourself, but in the confines of where you are. So the environment, the venue is vital. You know, I am not good at sitting down now like I am in a small environment. I'm a big person. You know, I talk to thousands of people, you know, from a stage, a small stage. That's me. I spoke at Google, and they have sort of a runway that you walk along. I loved it. The other two speakers that were there the day I was there, they didn't want to go on that stage. They were nervous. I sort of hypnotized them a bit before they did, because it was too much for them.
Yeah.
But I was in my element. So me sitting here trying to be fairly straight and stable and not flash I mean, this is not a good thing to do on video, obviously. Have your hands above your waistline. So I'm keeping my hands I'm just not that sort of person normally. Yeah. So you have to adapt to the scenario you're in. You have to be yourself. You have to know where you're going and what's, you know, the preparation you need to make. You can't fake it. you cannot fake it. I mean, I used to have, when I was coming through the ranks, I used to say, fake it till you make it, you know, be a boss. It was the in thing, wasn't it? I even
Absolutely.
registered the
Absolutely.
name for a book, actually, with the British Library. I think I've still got it. I don't know. But no, I don't believe that. I don't believe you fake it till you make it. What you can do is you can visualize yourself in the position already that you're going for. I think that's very important. So it's going past the interview stage, because if you put all the emphasis on the interview, that's what causes the stress. But if you see yourself working there, then the interview is just something that has to be done, you know, few ticks in the boxes. Automatically, you're more relaxed. So those are the sort of tips I would advise. Dress to suit yourself comfortably, but to suit the environment. Wear your crown before you get on the screen or face to face. Remember to look in the person's left eye if it is just one person. If you're on a group interview, it's completely different, obviously. And keep those feet on the ground. I can't, you say the crown's the most important thing. For me, it's the feet. So maybe we can say the feet and the head, you know, so in between is what the other learnings are, really.
Yeah. I think I absolutely spot on. And I think your advice about, you know, how you approach it, and especially that part that you talk about, visualizing yourself being there. You know, I talk a lot about it in my book, for instance, about how when you're doing, or when you're trying to get the interviews in the first place, rather than that sort of traditional write my CV, fire it off to as many things and hope something happens. It's about how you engage with your network, create a network, start engaging. And obviously we live in the time of social media. So it allows us to be able to do that so much better than we've ever been able to do that. And if you can then start engaging with people in a way as if, and make them think like you are already working there, make them think that you're like, this is like a colleague. It makes me feel like a colleague. And you can still transfer that through to that interview process. Your chances of success are so much higher for the obvious reason we talked about earlier, because, well, they start to like you. They start looking at you as if, well, this isn't an interview. This is sort of like a meeting with a work colleague.
Yes.
And if you get to that point of it, and I think it's a really good piece of advice there, that to think like that beforehand, rather than overly focusing on the pressure of this is an interview environment. I think it gives you naturally more confidence on that side as well.
Well, you can't actually, there's going to be some standard questions, you know, but there are questions that they're going to ask you that you have not prepared for. You know, that is their job, you know, to delve underneath. So if you let that go, I think you're ahead.
Yeah, most definitely. And sort of, I guess, sort of final part that as we sort of come towards the end of our session, it'd be interesting to find out, you know, a bit more about yourself. You know, how do people engage with you? What are the things that you normally do with your clients? And I mean, you've given some insights as to what it is. I mean, there may well be people here who have been fascinated by the slight insight that you've given into your life, to think, oh, I wonder if Carole can help me.
Sure, I'd love to help more people. Well, most of my work is done, as you said, I'm a business body language guru in the top 30 in the world, and I've had that position for 10 years. I'm actually slipping a little bit because the FBI guys are coming in and working in business. So it's I was fourth for 2 years, no longer. Anyway, I've been around a long time, so there is.
I don't want to upset the FBI, but even so, you can go past those. But I know exactly who you mean. We won't name them here, but I know who you mean. I know who you mean, and they have done well.
Yeah. So what I'm known most for, helping boardrooms communicate more effectively, and that means in a quicker time and more people understanding what's going on. And that's a lot to do with the differences between men and women. You know, work with CPA, Chartered Public Accountants, for 3 years, looking at that and how they could change and the benefits of it. because women, as I said, make more movements than men. Not only that, they compound it. They come in with a handbag and sometimes a briefcase, whereas men got their iPad in their jacket, just put the jacket over the chair. Women are unzipping things, you know, putting handbags down, hanging up coats, the whole lot. So they compound the number of moves they make. So even when they're in those senior positions, they're not seen as such on first glance. If you put people in a room and you ask to identify them, they will not come out generally in the positions they're in. So that's one of the areas I make money. I make money by helping stockbrokers or people who are about to merge or looking at buying a company to see, you know, these are the figures. So the, you know, and what's the reality? Are they working as a team? Are they committed? Is the CEO or the financial director still a long-term proposition just from the body language? And you can, when you get to this level, you can start doing that. So that's also another area. But on an individual level, I work with anybody who wants to increase their influencing skills, and that under that heading has confidence, going for interviews or stepping up if they're a CEO and they want to go on video, you know, and they've not done that before. If you look at my references on LinkedIn, you'll see that there's some pretty heavyweight people there that I've worked with, and they do the most charming little references. They become human when I work with them, you know, because they have to be themselves at some stage. Yeah, so, and I do lots of public speaking, which I prefer to sitting on a seat for an hour. It's just not me. I'm much better.
Next time we'll try it. You know, when we come out of all of this pandemic, and I think it would be great to sort of get back. And my, you know, the plans for when we are out of that is to have more actual conferences and get yourself to. So, you know, I'm sure that we'll be getting you involved in something like that, which is going to be a lot more in your.
I'll be much more relaxed. I'm just, you know, I can just go. And also, I'm actually slightly dyslexic. So dyslexic people are very visual.
Yeah.
And we feed off other people. You can't do that quite the same way on a screen. You know, we need the audiences. I did do a bit of acting in my past. And I remember one rehearsal, I was just absolutely awful. And I didn't want to go on stage, right? And the director, she said to me, Carole, I've never seen you perform before, but I know that you will be fantastic when there's an audience. And she was right.
Yeah.
And it was a big learning curve for me, actually, that it really, really was. So yes, I work with individuals who want to scale up or change the direction or do something that they've forgotten how to do, like golfers. I was saying that people, actors, you know, they used to be able to do it and they can't do it anymore. Something's hurt them or something. So I work with them as well.
Yeah, and so and you can. Sorry, go on.
Just one last thing. We talked about putting ourselves in a position where we were already there. Of course, that comes from selling skills as well. And I work a lot with salespeople because that's my background. I came out of sales and marketing. Yeah. So I charge, it's quite interesting. I charge you 50-50. You pay me 50% before I step across your threshold. And then you pay me 50% if we meet the objectives. If you don't meet them, then you don't pay me. Right. And I haven't not been paid, so it must be working. But I have turned down two very big, actually, very big. I won't name them, but one of them was absolutely ridiculous, you know. Mainly because they didn't have, the first one, mainly because they didn't have a way of evaluating, you know, wasn't in their system to be able to evaluate. It was really interesting, so I just walked away, which was, do you know what? That was really powerful. For me,
I bet, absolutely.
Really, you talk about equality. This is a multinational, and I walked away and I said, no, I don't want to deal with this. I can't. You know, it's fantastic. And so I still feel some guilt about that. Fred. It was really empowering. But yes, I mean, I've written a couple of books. Probably the one that you're interested in is called The Future of Body Language. And if you contact me directly, you can contact me at Carole Relton on Twitter. I'll give you a special offer if you say that you've seen or you've come to me via yourself. So you can offer that to
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put that, and so for everybody as part of the series, we'll add that through. So we'll put what the code will be for that. So it's something that, you know, Carole and I will put together. I'll put a code together for the masterclass series for you, and you'll be able to do that and get a discount as well.
And do you want to know about this? I mean, obviously, again, you can pull it out the video, but I have a Facebook page, which is Carole Relton Online, which is just general body language tips. It's not particularly for business, because I do have, you know, others which are for people who have worked with me. There's a very intense follow-up, and but that's only accessible if you've come through, you know, working with me. So there's this free one on Facebook is called Carole Relton Online, and you can pose questions there, and you can buy the book there, I think, as well. But if you come directly to me, I'll give you a special.
That's fantastic. And what we'll do is I'll put all the links to get to all your different social media as part of it, so everybody's got a way of contacting, and hopefully you'll see many thousands,
millions of people, right?
Millions around the world.
The whole new year will be sourced from your contacts. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Well, Carole, thank you so much for being part of this series. It's been absolutely fascinating. I can't believe, you know, we've had nearly an hour now, and it's absolutely flown past. It's been some really interesting tips. I'm sure that our audience will find that really useful as well. But have a very great Christmas. Thank you so much for taking part.